So very good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody joining the webinar today, the AIM webinar today. And it is my honour to be able to moderate this particular panel-based webinar today, whereby we're going to be asking a key question around organisational data and whether it can be used forensically for better mergers and acquisitions, M&A results. And over the next 45 to 60 minutes, I'm going to be pointing some questions to established an expert, internationally expert panel, who hopefully will be giving their insight and views as to what and how this could actually work more effectively. So I'm joined today by Anivar Sen from Fifth Chrome, by Rob Heaton from Global PMI Partners, Toby Tester from BTD Consulting, and our own Matt Smith from AIM. So very much welcome to you guys. Just before I invite you to step forward and give a biography about you and your firms and what your interests are and expertise is, just to say a little bit of housekeeping. So we'll be recording this session, of course, and this will be available after the event. And at the end, we'll tell you exactly how you can go and access that. And we'll probably also put it onto our podcast channel in due course. And the other point to add is that if you do have any questions as we do go through, then please send them through. I'm joined by my colleague Tom Duncan. He and I will also be looking for any questions which come out. And at the end, if you have anything you want to ask the panel, then please feel free to forward those, and we will do our best to put those to the panel at the end of the session. So that's the event for today. And I'd now like to ask the guys to come and introduce themselves. And we start with Anivar Sen from Fifth Chrome.
Thanks, Steve. My name is Anirvan Sen, and I'm the founder and CEO of Fifth Chrome and also founder of the Promise Framework. We are a business strategy advisor and a training company based in Amsterdam, but with a global footprint, including the US as well as Asia and, of course, Europe. We focus a lot on mergers and acquisitions and large-scale transformation. So that's about me. Back to you, Steve. And yeah.
Thanks, Anivar. Rob Heaton.
Thank you, Steve. Great to be on this webinar today. So for my sins, I'm part of the Global PMI Partners Network, and as the name implies, it's a global business. There's in excess of 400 M&A professionals. Global PMI Partners tends to focus particularly on post-deal integration, but for my sins, I also get involved in the pre-deal side of things as well. I've had a 30-year career in the tech industry prior to that, but it's probably in the last 5 to 6 years that I've become much more active in the M&A world.
Great, thanks, Rob. Toby, over to you.
Hi, Toby Tester. And good to be on this webinar. Look, I've worked in mergers and acquisitions for the past, dare I say, about 25 odd years now. Worked on dozens of transactions here in Australia, but also around the world, of many shapes and sizes and so many industries, I couldn't even begin to mention them all. BTD Consulting, look, I'm a member of BTD Consulting, which is a British-based consulting firm specializing in M&A. And what we do is we simply help organizations deliver better deal value from their from and so to optimize the results and help them transform their companies.
Great, thanks, Toby. And Matt Smith from AIM.
Hello, everybody. Matt Smith. I'm an M&A technology specialist at AIM, and I've got a number of different hats at AIM, some of which are solution architect and product owner of an M&A and data governance platform called DataBelt. And my particular interest is in how data, but more specifically technology-led data analysis, can assist in M&A activities.
Great, thanks very much. And just to say, those who've tuned in, I'm sure you know these guys anyway. As I said, they are highly respected international experts. They're broadcasters. They've had published works If you're not familiar, then definitely do check them out, because they've got some excellent content, well worth looking into and helping with any M&A activities that you're involved in. So thank you very much indeed for that, panelists. And I think what we do is we start off with a couple of sort of scene setting context questions, just get a feel for what 2024 might be looking like from the M&A market. And I'll start with you, Rob. I mean, what's your view on what the landscape is going to be looking like for next year? We're at the end of 2023. 2022 was a little bit on the hard side. What are your views on that?
I think there's a couple of things that are influencing the M&A landscape in the current climate, and that is that M&A is being used much more as a strategic tool for growth in businesses. Companies are starting to, we went through that COVID period. Of course, it put a lot of companies under stress, but coming out of that, most CEOs then sort of became aware of using M&A as a way of driving growth across the business, both globally, but also across certain technologies. So, there's emerging technologies like AI, for example, which is, really front and center. And that's driving a lot of M&A deals at the moment and activity. Is it a buyer's market or a seller's market? I think it's a buyer's market still at the moment. That's my view. But I'd be interested to see what Toby and Annabelle have to say.
Yeah, Toby, what are your thoughts?
Yeah,
what's facing you next year?
Well, I think what's happening, and I think what's happening around the world in actual fact, is the money is no longer as cheap as it used to be. So, look, if there are organisations looking to do M&A deals, I think then debt funding is higher than people will remember for a long, long time. So I think that probably will dissuade a number of organisations considering potential M&A opportunities simply because of the cost of debt. We're having here, at least here in Australia, a bit of an IPO drought. So there's not many initial public offerings at the moment. So not too sure how that will change next year. But as what Rob was saying, I think I think where there's going to be activity, I think in M&A, I think is where I think organisations start looking at the opportunities that artificial intelligence has to offer and see if they can bring those sort of capabilities on board. And I think the other thing I think is the push away from fossil fuels towards more natural resources. And so energy type businesses who are looking to, ditch fossil because it is becoming a fossil, literally, fossil fuels, then there's going to be more activity there. So I can see activity there, but I think it could be a quiet year next year.
Anavar, do you think it's a quiet year for 2024, Fifth Chrome?
I actually think that, 2023 was relatively a quiet year because people were still sort of feeling the post-COVID, they're still not ready. And I'm just going to build on what Robert and Toby said. So in my opinion, I personally think that 2024, we're going to see more movement in certain sectors, right? Much more than some of the other sectors, right? So some of the asset-heavy sectors, we probably will see less of, i.e. the energy and some of the large industrial bases. But we are likely to see is a lot more movement around technology, especially around digital and AI, because literally, with ChatGPT coming in, it has changed the way that we hadn't seen. In many cases in our lifetimes, the tectonic shift from one day to the other or 1 month to the other. So in my opinion, we are probably going to see more transactions taking place in technology, in people-centric or talent-centric businesses. We expect, or at least we already see some of the SMEs getting into this game. Also, there is going to be, in my opinion, a lot more divestitures as companies, large companies, try to focus on their core, generate some money. So there is going to be divestitures. Emerging markets, India probably is going to play a bigger role in the M&A space compared to China. China is still lagging behind, especially with the manufacturing shift, the supply chain problems that were there in COVID. So that's is what I would say would take place. So overall, my prediction is that 2024, certain sectors we're going to see more. And one last thing, which is around the money. So here's the reality: the money has become tight, but for the right opportunity, there's still plenty of money available. The problem is a lot of people, and because we do transaction advisory as well, a lot of people think that money grows on trees. You're going to use that phrase, but the thing is, 99 out of the 100 cases, they are not what I call investor ready, and therefore, if with the right kind of settings, with the right kind of preparation, there is still lots of money available, especially in the SME sector, especially in the talent centric and technology centric. So that's my prediction for 2024.
Great, thanks very much. So Rob, do you sort of agree with that? So talent centric, tech centric sounds like the guy's view is going to be less about quantity, more about quality.
Absolutely, yeah. I think we can say goodbye to the days of quantity in terms of M&A. It's much more focused, much more targeted. CEOs are becoming more selective in terms of and more descriptive in terms of the acquisitions they want to make. And by descriptive, I mean they're being much more choosy in the sort of criteria that they're looking for when they're making an acquisition. And I'll also echo Anirvan's comments as well, that post-COVID, it almost forced every CEO, it didn't matter whether you're in a large company or a small one, to sit down and look at the business and say, which parts of the business do we really need to drive our future growth, and which parts of the business are no longer necessary. And so there was an increase in divestments as well as acquisitions as well. It's become a very strategic tool. I've long said that the days of being able to grow a business purely by organic means have long gone. And so if you're a CEO in a business today, you've got to be using M&A as one of your strategies for growth.
So very much strategic tool, all about the right targets. And as Anwar said, the money is potentially still there, but it's going to be a narrower, I guess, a narrow area. I mean, apart from tech, which obviously, I suppose still on the hype cycle to a point, and particularly, it's had a resurgence with generative AI technology. Everybody wants to invest in that. All the big hyper advisors, they're all coming along, and scalers and coming along and looking at how they can therefore start to introduce that sort of technology. It used to be a little bit a year or two ago with blockchain. If you have blockchain in your title, if you're blockchain.com, then of course you're a target. I mean, do you feel there's any particular areas in the tech side? Is it all around software and that sort of level of technology, or are there other areas in the technology that you feel, Rob, are going to be targets?
It's an interesting point that I can just go back to deals that I've been working on recently. A lot of people are actually quite averse to making technology deals in what I'll call the services area, simply because the companies themselves don't own the IP of the services that they deliver. So it is very much a software market, and within the software market, health sciences, financial services, AI, data, BI, all that sort of stuff. They're the sexy ones that are always right up front. And companies are looking for those acquisitions to bolster the range of services and products that they can offer to their customer base. So, yeah, there's always going to be that element of, attractive and sexy technology sectors. They're the ones that will probably still manage to claim higher multiples in terms of valuation.
Yes.
Okay.
And
but what I will say, sorry, what I will
Sorry,
say just to finish is that the market itself, as from my point of view, stabilised a bit as well. So those days of seeing really high multiples being offered, they're gone.
Yes. Do you agree with that, Anavar? I mean, the days, even for some of the targeted tech companies, people have got to, owners, whoever's going to be selling, have to accept, obviously, that some of the good days may be behind them, or certainly not right now anyway, next few years.
Yeah, no, I mean it's a great question, a $1 million question. In my opinion, what we are likely to witness is certain sectors, the multiples are going to go down. We just mentioned about blockchain. So blockchain, which was kind of the red hot thing a few years back, and now many companies don't want to consider blockchain necessarily as an enabling tool, even though I personally am aware of the advantages of blockchain. I still believe that it's probably underutilized even now, right? So in my opinion, there are certain, even within software technology companies, we're going to see kind of a differentiator, niching in certain areas and non-niching in other areas. The niched areas, we are going to see probably an increase of multiples. And the reason I say this is, so ChatGPT was launched end of November, and I started using ChatGPT around 3rd or the 4th of December. So one of the really early adopters. It's less than a year, and so many companies have come up. So many companies have integrated generative AI, and these companies are absolutely killing the market, and they are coming up with ways. It's early days, but some of these companies are going to become the next sort of unicorns, or they would more than likely to be absorbed by large companies, as we saw in the case of ChatGPT itself getting acquired for a multi-billion-dollar valuation. So my take is we're going to see large or increase, or maybe at least in the double digits valuation for, let's say, generative AI businesses. On the other side, some technology areas may go back to single digit multiples, no longer double digits. Yeah.
Toby, any more to add before we move on to talk a
No,
little bit about data?
not really. The only thing I'd say generally, and I think this is something I've seen over the last 25 years working in M&A, is that I think people are getting a lot more sophisticated at it. There was a bit of a gun-ho attitude towards it all. And I go back, 25 odd years ago, but it is a lot more sophisticated now. And I think the people who work in the industry, dare I say, people like ourselves here, the disciplines are much better, and as a result, management of risk is better. So you'll find that the M&A that's done these days generally tends to be more successful due to that extra level of sophistication we're seeing in the people who do the deals, but also the people who do the advisory as well, people like ourselves, of course.
Very good. I think stay with you, Toby, on that note, as you mentioned about risk, control of risk. So obviously from a data point of view, we're interested in data-led organizations. That's what we do at AIM. How can we position an organization? Very keen to understand again what your view is around the degree to which technology is currently being used to do obviously financials, but most importantly non-financial due diligence of an organization to sort of understand their posture. I mean, what's again is your experience? Is this being used enough, or again is it something actually which successful M&As don't really need in quite the way maybe that we're suggesting?
Oh, no, it's certainly needed, because I think due diligence in itself is a critical part of the whole M&A process, because it ultimately is about risk management. And really what you're trying to do is make sure you understand what are the risks associated with this deal. Now, one of the problems is, and it's particularly with due diligence, it is actually very time bound. A transaction runs at a certain speed. That's simply just due to the market forces that are at play. So quite often you only have perhaps just a few weeks, a couple of months, perhaps, not long, because you're pushing through. And generally, you could be dealing with a heck of a lot of data. Now, that means supplier contracts, of which could be hundreds, potentially even thousands. Sometimes I've worked on ones where there have been literally thousands of contracts to go through. You could be going through software, like doing software diligence. nonetheless, you can be dealing with an incredible volume of information that you have to somehow process, and giving that to human beings to deal with sometimes opens gaps. So using any sort of data-led sort of tools that will help you crunch and get through it better and faster and get your answers is always going to be better. Has it been done well in the past? Well, I've seen it done. Could it be done better? Absolutely.
Great. Rob, what are your views on the deals that you've worked with? Obviously, we've been speaking on this sort of subject the last few years anyway, but what are your views?
I'm still amazed at the number of large organisations that still rely on Excel spreadsheets to do their due diligence. Yeah, I don't need to mention them. We know who they are. From my point of view, non-financial due diligence is just as important as financial data due diligence. In any acquisition, you want to understand your customer profiles. You want to understand your employees and their employment conditions. You want to understand your suppliers and the geographies that they operate in and all that sort of thing. And more importantly, one of the things that I've seen across my years with good quality sort of BI driven data is it allows you to identify the things that you don't see in a spreadsheet. So it allows you to identify hidden patterns on things that you wouldn't normally see just by looking at a list of numbers. It helps you identify potential problems in a business that under normal conditions wouldn't rise to the surface. So that for me is the power of non-financial data management as part of an M&A. It's equally as I'd go as far as saying it's more important sometimes. The financial stuff is, yes, you go through it, you can look at your P&L, you can look at your balance sheet, you can tick all the boxes and say, yeah, it's profitable, it's growing at the right level, it's got the right level of debt to equity ratio and all of those things. But it's really the operational stuff that is where to use one of Toby's phrases, is where the gold's hidden. That's where the buried treasure is.
So true. So true. And absolutely. And we've spoken about this, and you've in the past have illuminated various stories about understanding the posture of an organization, behaviors, possibly the leadership team who are part of the selling process. Making sure again that when you buy an organization, it's about profitability. It's also, as you said, about operations. It's about the data it owns. It's about the quality of that data. It's about its customer base. As we know, any organization where the data is not as it should be could cause all sorts of issues. It's not just necessarily an operational issue, but a compliance issue, regulatory issue, and everything else. So it is very, very important. Anivar, you do an awful lot in this. Again, what views can you share around?
I'll come at it slightly differently, from a different angle, right? So historically, we saw literally an upsurge of M&A activities from the 80s, or more so in the 90s, right? At that point in time, you acquired companies primarily for the assets that they have, because at that point in time, getting more assets would give you competitive advantage. So all of the due diligence that we talk about today, the main ones, which is financial, tax, legal, DD, were based on that thinking, and I call it the 20th century thinking, right? So it was we are acquiring assets to gain a competitive advantage, and therefore let's look at the trinity of the from a due diligence perspective. But now fast forward to 2023, and we see that there are companies that get acquired which are no longer based on assets necessarily, but based on technology or based on people. We are more IP centric, talent centric, and that's where the Trinity due diligence is no longer enough. So you definitely need to get into the technology DD, but also what I call capabilities due diligence, because it's no longer about functionally integrating two companies, it's about integrating capabilities. And this is where a lot of companies, especially the new age companies, still struggle with, because they're thinking the asset-based thinking, which was more functional integration versus capabilities integration, which is a combination of technology, of people, of cultures, and of the organization structure. So in my opinion, the technology DD, the talent DD, the capabilities DD have become a lot more important in certain kinds of industries, a lot more than just plainly looking at the assets that a company has to gain a competitive advantage.
Very good. Toby, any additional thoughts before I move on to Matt?
Yeah, look, I think one of the challenges, and this is a challenge I had in actual fact, I think I remember in a deal, I think it was going back a few years ago, where we actually literally had to go trawl through 2,000 contracts and look for clauses that might actually fact trip us up. And we didn't know exactly what we're looking for, but we knew that there are certain clauses that will actually become material. And how do you trawl through 2,000 contracts? You know, I mean, it's like a real issue here without someone actually reading them. And well, you know, that's kind of hard. And so that was very important to me at the time, because obviously we had to sort of say, we've done our due diligence, what are the risks? But unless you actually went through those 2,000 contracts, you know, and actually you didn't know exactly what problems you're dealing with. So there was this sort of unknown aspect that really hung over the deal, and we needed to get to grips with that. And it was a problem. It was a genuine problem, and I don't think we ever really fully resolved it. And there were some contracts and that had clauses that potentially left the acquirer exposed.
Yes, I can imagine, as you said, it's difficult to underwrite a risk when it's hanging on your advice. If, as you said, you haven't necessarily had the time or resource to actually go through everything with fine tooth comb. And that leads us neatly onto, I think, you, Matt, in terms of, you know, recognizing, as we're saying, data is a key asset. The posture of an organization is key. I mean, what have you been doing in relation with the tooling, for example, for helping an organisation to understand some of its postures in relation, say, to compliance or cyber security, data protection, all those sorts of things?
Yeah, I agree with the guys that these types of data-led deals are becoming increasingly important. But I just wanted to make the point really that it's not that type of data is now important. It's always been important. But if you can't analyze it and you can't understand it, then it can't factor into any decision making. So that's the main point, really. So echoing what Toby said there, if you've got 1,000 contracts to go to, and let's say you're time boxed again, as Toby said earlier, and you literally don't have the time to go through all those contracts, then naturally any decision making that you have isn't going to be based on that data. Now, what some of the things we're looking at is, let's say you're looking at how many instances of customer information an organization has. That's great, but actually it's the quality of that data that's a lot more important. If I've got 1 million customer records, but actually half of them are just a first name and a last name, that's no use to me if I'm buying or selling. And so it's using technology to actually get down into the detail, be able to use some really clever stuff that we're doing at the moment, like taking in those 1,000 contracts that Toby spoke about, using optical character recognition on them. Let's say they're printed contracts, being able to tease out that information and analyze it. And also some of the other stuff that you might not have considered is around, and we've spoken about this type of concept before, the intangibles, is, well, how is my company seen? What's the sentiment that people have towards my brand from, you know, open source information like on social media sites? But also, what's the sentiment that my customers have towards me in phone conversations, let's say? How do you analyze 25 years of recorded telephone conversations? Well, you can't without technology. So it's just the point, really, that I suppose that these data-led deals are only becoming increasingly important, not because that information was important. Of course, it was important about how my company is seen, and it's important about what the quality of my data is. But actually, without the tools to be able to analyze it and get some insight from it, then it couldn't factor really into any decision making.
Yeah, totally agree. And leading on from that, and again, I'm a quick point from you, Matt, and then we move back to the guys. Infonomics and monetization of data. So, how can we not just be sure that the information that we haven't got any sort of hidden bombs or grenades in there ready to blow up that we're not aware of, risks which we haven't actually quantified. How are you dealing with the ability to monetize data, or at least give people a view as to its value, whether they want to use that for, as I said, their own internal purposes, managing their own risk, or maybe even going and following a route whereby they want to share that data as part of their supply chain, or even sell that data if they're able to out to other organizations to assist them. Is that something also that you are doing or have been doing?
Yeah, I mean, looking at data quality of customer information and leads and opportunities and that type of thing is really key. So what we're able to do is to look at a database of contact information and feed certain rules into the system that essentially say, if you've got a customer record and there are 10 attributes that you could have there, like phone number, email address, postcode, all that type of thing, you can actually look at that and say, right, yes, we've got a customer record here and it's 90% complete, and we've got another one here that's 50% complete. So you can start looking at that sort of database quality and actually therefore say, yeah, we've got 1 million contacts and actually average quality is 70%. That sounds pretty good to me. What you can then layer over the top of that is, as I mentioned earlier, things like sentiment. So having 1 million customers to sell to is great, but if they hate your product and they hate your company and they hate your brand, well, that's no good. So one of the things that we've been using technology for that I think is really interesting is taking in telephone call recordings, automatically transcribing them, and then feeding that text through a sentiment analyzer in DataBelt. So not only can I then say I've got 1 million contacts and the quality of that is at 75%, but I've actually got an average sentiment of, let's say, 1.5, which is positive. And I think that's a really powerful message, actually, that technology therefore allows you to say as a seller, great, yeah, I've got all this good data and I've actually got some happy people to sell to.
So it's basically works in both, whether you're buying or selling. It allows the seller to prove that what they're selling is genuine in a transparent way, and obviously from the buyer to ensure that there isn't any risk. Yeah, great. Rob, what are your views again on data monetization? And I believe that those who are leading best practices on accounting are also looking at some point at moving data as being a true asset. And as I say, increasingly, I think when you're looking at technology and hosting and most of those now, or having a cloud first approach, obviously data is the if you like the tangible asset that an organization has as a value. I mean, that may well be changing, but what are your views? Are your deals again looking at data as an asset, and they want to have a feel for how good it is and what its value is?
I'll echo Toby's points. The deals that I'm working on, the quality of data is really important. And, particularly when you're talking about your customer data, you're talking about, sales, procurement data, all of that sort of thing. The quality of it is far more important. Monetizing it, I'm not seeing that happen. But I'll still go to the point that it's high on the agenda. And I once had an example of a deal where the CEO that was driving the deal actually posed a question to me, and he said, what if you take over a business and it's certain people in the business that's being acquired don't like the fact that they're being taken over, and you come in the following morning to find out that the sales directors completely wiped the entire customer database. That's a horror story to consider.
It is,
but it's a reality that could happen within a split second.
Yeah.
And so the quality,
Yeah,
of
you're
data,
right.
the readiness of it is critical.
You know, Rob, look, I've worked on plenty of deals where the whole objective was to actually increase the customer base. And so the acquisition was based upon acquiring those customers, and you bring those customers on board.
Yeah.
But you want to make sure it's pretty good quality. And you're not just getting, somebody's name and no address, or these customers aren't active, or they haven't transacted, or they haven't done anything. They're just sitting there on a list. And if you don't probe and just check the quality of this customer list, then you don't know what you're really paying for. I mean, you have no idea. You can't. It could be a very bad deal indeed.
I totally agree.
Yeah.
And Anivar, how about you on your deals? Again, data being towards the top of the list nowadays in terms of an asset that people are interested in. As you know, we're buying an organization for their customer base, their operations, their contacts, their sentiment, what people think of the brand.
Yeah, I mean, I'll divide on this perspective. Data definitely has become a lot more important than it used to be in the past, right? But I'll divide the world in two categories. One that are looking at conventional data, and one that are looking at data for value innovation, right? And I think Toby and Rob, you guys had used this concept in one of your podcasts. So these days, there's a lot more digital assets that are there, which a lot of companies don't know how to monetize. And when I talk about this is, let's say, your Instagram followers, your LinkedIn followers, or you have a number of YouTube videos that have tons of data around it. Okay, that clearly is monetizable both for you as well as the buyer that you have, or from a selling perspective. But not a lot of companies have become sophisticated enough to be able to go down that path, right? So the two categories, one category is, let me call it conventional. The other category is where people see opportunity through data mining, and all of that stuff. This particular category, I see pockets of sophistication. So, for example, the Bay Area have a lot more of this compared to the rest of the world. I mean, for the rest of the world, in Europe, in the UK, I still don't see as sophistication when it comes to actually trying to visualize what the possibilities could be if I acquired a LinkedIn group, for example, or if I acquired an Instagram sort of influencer kind of thing. So this is where I think the world still lacks sophistication, largely. And this is where I clearly see that there are huge monetizable opportunities, but not enough sophistication to actually make it happen.
That's interesting.
Rob, and even I've seen that as well.
Yes, sorry, Toby.
Yeah, I was going to say, in actual fact, what you're saying is actually quite relevant, because I've been on a few deals where they didn't market it properly. Like, they were monetizable, these opportunities, to do with data, etc. But they didn't market this, and it didn't go into the presentation of materials and into the value proposition for the business that was, to say, for example, a business to be sold. And they didn't go that extra step to say, here's some things you could potentially monetize. This is how you can do it and how you can profit. But that they put that into the presentation materials and into the value proposition? No, they didn't.
I'd add to that. If Elon Musk is listening to this webinar, maybe he could have done a bit more due diligence work when he took Twitter.
Yeah, do that right.
Yeah, I think we'd direct this to him afterwards and say, here you go. It's like hindsight, but nevertheless, for the next time you buy something. Absolutely, Rob.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, I think I agree, and I'm interested. Again, you guys are the ultimate observers of the industry and how that is developing. I mean, do you see this maturity improving? Sort of digital maturity in M&A, I suppose you might want to call it. Do you see that improving then, Anivar, in the next, or are you helping to educate your customers who come to you for advice and consulting? Are you, maybe direct them down that way?
Yeah, it's both. And my sort of forecast, my prediction is that with generative AI clubbed together with the conventional, or let's say the data mining tools, it'll allow us to essentially look for risks far more efficiently than we could have ever done it. Like, so for example, going through 2,000 contracts will probably become easier. And again, I put a disclaimer there that not everything that AI throws at you is accurate, but at least it could, with the right kind of prompt, you could still make it happen. So in my opinion, that with generative AI clubbed with conventional methodologies, we'll be seeing a lot more movement and a lot more ability to be able to identify opportunities, monetizable opportunities, and as well as look at some of the conventional data to identify risks. So that's my prediction. And yes, we are educating them. I should also say not as much as we should, but I think this webinar is in the right direction. This is something that we need to discuss a lot more than we have done in the past.
Rob, Toby, you agree with that? Education is key. This is into a new area.
I think so. I think, the thing is with M&A, it's a discipline in its own right. It's a true skill set. And I think that
Very true.
probably maybe 25 years ago, it wasn't recognized as such. And it was something that was done by the financiers. And so you do a bit of financial due diligence, bit of legal, maybe, and then the assets look good. And as Anirvan said, he's just basically acquired the assets and off you go. We're a lot cleverer these days. And due diligence, for example, goes through to people, customers, technology, or so on and so forth. It's much broader. And I think as a result, the risks are managed better. So it is getting better. And I can only see it improving, I think, the way, and particularly troweling through data fast and effective, because the thing about M&A is it has to happen quick. We don't have time. Transactions by their very nature, by the market dictates that they are done quickly. And so you've got to do an awful lot in very little time.
Yeah. And Matt, I think in terms of that time boxing, as we said, is also key, not just around the M&A side of activities that you work on and your team work on, but also in the widest footing. How do you quickly get to insight quickly from a lot of structured and unstructured data? Again, that is, I'm guessing, really, really important, isn't it? And not just around M&A as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if we take the point of generative AI, I agree with what Anirvan said and Toby said about taking that with a pinch of salt in how useful it might actually be for you. What you've actually got to do is make sure that you've got some sort of data lake. You've actually sort of indexed and grabbed all your data and put it somewhere where that generative AI can access it in order for it to be useful to you. And yeah, if I'm a CEO and I go and have a chat with ChatGPT and say, shall I sell or shall I buy? I'm not going to get good information from that. What I've got to do is use generative AI against my own company's data. And that's what we allow you to do with DataBelt, to actually grab everything, index it, and bring it into that virtualized data lake. So yeah, I agree, Steve, that getting all that data quickly in a place where you can then analyze it is key. As you say, not just for M&A, but to be honest, with any data-led organization, you need to be able to do that nowadays.
And Rob, obviously we've spoken about due diligence and management of risk a lot, but if you break down the M&A process into pre-deal, deal, and post-deal, do you feel again there's any use for this sort of approach during the deal and the post-deal? When you're looking at getting synergies together, or do you feel it's largely one step at a time? Let's just focus on how it can be used better for due diligence in the pre-deal stage.
No, I think there's a role to be played. One of the things that happens a lot in M&A is a board will get excited about an opportunity and they approve the opportunity for the acquisition. The acquisition goes ahead, and the board have actually placed that they've got a strategy as to why they're making an acquisition and have sold it that way to the shareholders. But very few of them actually go back post deal and sort of say, well, did we achieve what we set out to do? So that sort of quality of data has got a very important part to play both in pre and post deal. and I hope I'm not going up on a tangent a bit, but while everybody else was talking, I'm reminded of an experience I had in Basel, in Switzerland. And I know exactly where I was. I was at Nestle's headquarters, and I was listening to the CEO of Nestle. And he was getting quite frustrated. And he actually turned around at one point, and it was one single statement from him, and I've never forgotten it. He said, "I'm absolutely fed up of steering this ship," as he called it, by being fed with information that shows me where I've been.
Yeah.
I want data and information that shows me where I'm going.
Yeah.
And I've never forgot that about it was so insightful in terms of, I don't need to be reminded what we did last month. We know all that.
Yes.
I want to use data as a way of predicting what I can do in the future and where I can go.
Yes.
And that's really the essence of what we're talking about here in M&A.
You're absolutely right. And I mean, obviously, when you look at financial and legal due diligence, they're only ever looking in the rearview mirror, largely. You're quite right.
Yeah.
Matt, I mean, in terms of organizations who want to take that data and model it into something realistic and useful, again, are you seeing organizations that want to take data in that sort of vein and use it in that sort of way increasingly? Or are they still backward looking and think they can make predictions therefore about what's happened before?
Yeah, absolutely. You need to then leverage technology in order to do that. I mean, yes, you can have analytics looking at data that's currently in your databases, but how do you then infer what's going to happen in the future? You either need a team of very, very good data scientists, or if you don't have the time to hire a load of them, or you don't have the money to do that, then leveraging technology to help you with that task is certainly something we'd recommend.
Okay, great. Just to say to everybody in the audience that we're in the last 5-10 minutes of the webinar. So if you have any questions, please forward them on, and we'll pick one or two up at the end, as I said. Anavar, again, in terms of technology, are you seeing this as being for the full life cycle of the M&A? So, due diligence, risk assessment, but also checking to see how successful you've been, because as well as I do, when it comes down to things like projects and programs, generally people are not very good at actually seeing how successful they were, and therefore using that as, even though they do, lessons learned, generally lessons are never learned. What do you view around M&A?
Yeah, I'll take an optimistic and a pessimistic view, right? So in the optimistic view, or rather, let me start with the pessimistic view. So the pessimistic view is the world largely is still going to continue to operate that they have for the last 30 years. That's the reality. Will data play a part? Yes, for the conventional part. But as Matt described it, creating a data lake, using that data lake with generative AI to sort of predict the future, how likely that's going to happen in the next year or two, only in pockets. The optimistic side of me says that there is a large opportunity for already start using data right up front, right at the strategy level. When you're setting the strategy, why? Because today there's a lot more data available in the public domain than there was ever before, right? So, which means that you can already start analyzing target companies, even before they come up through your deal screening stage. You could use technology, use sophisticated pieces like data lake and combined with generative AI to already start screening your initial screening. So the start will take place, or should start taking place, from the strategy stage, definitely during the due diligence stage, the deal screening stage, and pre-deal. But I think the real magic is going to happen in the value innovation, which is the post deal, once you have access to all the data that you had. And this is where magic can happen, provided you start using the data the right way. Because literally, you have all the data that's possible. And now you look at the art of possibilities, the things that we couldn't capture during the due diligence. What can we do now, since we have the data access, in order to build value innovation? The reality is that majority of the companies don't do enough value innovation. The only companies that do somewhat of this would be the companies that get backed by certain private equities, because they try to create not just financial re-engineering or the just do it's, or the as Rob calls them, bleeding obvious ones. But value innovation can actually happen once you get the data, use the data technology in a sophisticated manner, and come up with value innovation, because that's where I think true values are going to be created. That's the optimistic side of me saying.
Toby, share those views, or you've got a slightly different
Yeah, look,
view on it?
I think when it comes to, say, for the integrations space, because obviously I think there's a lot of opportunity around the pre-deal area, but if you do post-deal, I mean, the opportunity really is to do more synergy modeling. And so if you can do more sophisticated modeling of synergies, which is never done very well, by the way, it's sort of done, but usually done pretty badly. Some organizations are better than others, but so there's plenty of opportunity to do this better, but it does rely on a lot of data and having that data available, and to be able to go through scenarios, or where you have, for example, as Irvin was saying, like certain innovations. Well, what would that do if you made this change? What would that do to the end result? In other words, would we be saving costs? Would we be able to be more productive in this area? But to be able to answer that, you need the data, and you need to be able to do rapid analysis and do some projections based upon that. So there is opportunity to do that better.
Great, thank you for that. We've got a question that has come out, which is quite an interesting one, and obviously, for the person asking it, you've got the experts on. I think it suggests you maybe make contact afterwards. But they're talking about gaps in knowledge and skills, and can technology, in your view, bridge those particular gaps? Now, we've already spoken about, obviously, the resource intensive, shall we say, of having to look through potentially thousands of different contracts and pulling out the relevant clauses, which could undermine a deal, or exposure a buyer perhaps to a particular risk. But Toby, what are your thoughts? My view is you'll never be replaced by technology, but maybe to supplement what you do. But what are your views on that?
Just ask the question again, just to make sure I clear it, so I can answer it clearly.
So can technology?
Yeah.
So obviously there's some gaps in M&A knowledge, I guess, or
Yep.
that's position. Can technology therefore be seen intelligently to bridge some of those gaps they currently are? And I just mentioned again the point you'd made.
Well,
To look through thousands of different contracts, when that's an expensive, potentially mind-blowing process for a small team to do.
Well, knowledge is, of course, you have data, and data, are properly sort of, sort of assessed and synthesized, becomes knowledge. And so knowledge is having a broader understanding of what data can tell you. So insofar as that the data can actually build a kind of an understanding, a narrative, or a story, or a message, that only can help build that knowledge up. And so I think data has an incredible opportunity to really get very sophisticated in being knowledgeable and be able to discuss. And then you can have discussions and have knowledgeable discussions on things, but you can't do it without actually having that data that actually brings you those underlying sort of information. So it's that thing, data, information, then transforming it into knowledge.
Rob, what are your views on that?
Well, look, I would echo what Toby and Anavan have said. Data is one of the most important tools that you can use in an M&A process, both pre and post. It's an enabler, right? And anybody making an acquisition today, ideally what you're trying to do is you're trying to make the value of the two companies greater than the sum of each other. So 1 + 1 has got to equal 3 or 4. And data is the way that you identify that. I think one of the things we have to be careful with is that data is an enabler that can take you to a certain point. It gets through all the slog work. It can present you with scenarios and opportunities. But if you've got an idiot at the receiving end, it's still not going to be much use to you. So it's still about the quality of the person that is interpreting that and making decisions on it. But a lot of the slog work that we used to do, I was thinking of an example I had. One of the early M&As I dealt with was an organisation that was impacted significantly by seasonal trends. And when you looked at the data of that company across a whole year, you sort of sat there and went, well, that's great, fantastic. But when you actually looked at the seasonal patterns that were in that, it was catastrophic at certain parts of the year. And, you really had to pay attention to it. So now, in that scenario, going back all those years, it took enormous amount of data shuffling and calculating and goodness knows what else to get a picture.
Yeah.
And then if somebody turned around and said, "Oh yeah, but what if March's seasonal trend increases by 10%?" You had to go right back to the beginning and start all over again to try and see what that result is. That's where the power of data really, really helps.
Okay.
But it still comes down to the end. From my point of view, you've still got to have someone on the receiving end of that.
People. Yeah.
Humans are not going to be replaced.
That's what I think is the message. No. Thank God for that.
They're not. They're not. With all this talk about AI, all we're talking about is narrow AI. They just do very specific tasks, but they're pretty stupid in many ways. I think human beings are going to be around for a long, long time to come. We're not going to be replaced.
No, absolutely right. And, that's good for M&A. Yes.
Yeah,
sorry,
let me answer the conversation here, right? So when it comes to the gaps in skills, I would say we are talking about two kinds of gaps in skills: capacity and capabilities, right? So while the total ecosystem is is going to have human beings, but certain activities are going to be taken over by technology. That's my belief. It's not going to be that people are going to be replaced. What's going to happen is jobs are going to be replaced. What the jobs or roles that we had 5 years back are probably not going to be the same in the next 5 years or 10 years, right? And that's what's going to change. So that's why you need to see whether it's a capacity gap or a capability gap. Overall, from the ecosystem, you should look at technology and AI being an augmentation of where your gaps are, but you need to work with a human-machine interface.
Yes, very good.
Yeah,
very good. It's a as you quite rightly to summarise, M&A is a very exciting discipline because it brings together all those soft skills, hard skills, analysis, financial. It's one of those skill sets which, as you said, you'll never get AI to fully replace, but it can be an aid in allowing you to get some information. That's all the time we have. Thank you very much indeed to our panel. I'd like to thank again, Rob, Toby and Anavar for a very interesting view. Thank you indeed for your time as an audience. Recordings will be made available to you. And obviously people who are unable to make it today as well can go and see this afterwards. And as I say, I believe we're going to issue that as a podcast and people will be notified what that is. Thanks also for Matt for giving your view around what we're doing around data and how that can possibly help M&A as well. So thank you, everybody. And I wish you all the best for the rest of the day. Thanks again. Bye-bye.
Thank you all. Bye.
Thank you, Steve. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Cheers.